Some things seem to have faded into the past, forgotten, buried. But then, unexpectedly, they awaken, the moment the clock hands stop. It was a freezing night. I stepped into house number 21, a place abandoned for nearly 3 decades. No one lived there. No one ever came back. And no one dared to touch the wall clock in the old bedroom. That clock had stopped working since 1994, exactly 3:17 a.m. I'm not a superstitious man. I'm just a storyteller. But maybe. Some stories aren't meant to be told, and some are never meant to be heard again. In the corner cabinet, I found an old photo album covered in thick dust. A brittle piece of paper slipped out. A copy of a newspaper article from years ago. The body of a woman was found in her bedroom. Police recorded the time of death as 3:17 a.m. The exact moment the wall clock had stopped. No one ever figured out why the clock stopped at that precise time. It wasn't the battery, it wasn't broken. It just stopped. And since then, it never ticked again. Locals started calling it the Hourless House. They said that anyone who enters after midnight will no longer hear time pass. I turned on my flashlight. The dust floated like ash. The silence inside was unnerving. Then I looked up at the clock again. The hands were still frozen at 3:17 a.m., but I swear I heard a faint ticking sound, as if it had been waiting for the right person to return, to start the countdown. I found it beneath the bed, wrapped in a decaying plastic bag. It was a small diary, its leather cover scarred by time, the pages yellowed with age. The ink had blurred on several entries, but I could still make out the words, written in a trembling hand. Her name was Mai. The first entry dated back just weeks before that fateful night. As I read through the pages, I could feel her fear growing. Night after night, dream after dream. I'm not sure if I imagined it, but last night I heard footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate, step by step. I locked every door, but this morning the back door was slightly ajar. I dreamed someone was watching me, standing outside of my bedroom door. But when I opened it, no one was there. On the final page, the writing became erratic, rushed, the letters leaning sideways, smeared in ink. If the clock stops ticking, it means he's made it in. I froze when I read that line. Him? Who was he? I looked around the room as I read those last words. There was no breeze, no one else in the house, but the curtain to my right swayed slightly, as if someone had just passed behind me. I spun around. Nothing. But in that moment, I was sure of one thing. The air in the room had suddenly turned cold. I don't believe in ghosts. I've stayed in places far worse than this one. But for the first time in years, I felt someone standing directly behind me, unseen. I pulled out my audio recorder to check for any electromagnetic interference. It was nothing but the sound of my own breathing. But when I played the recording back, a faint voice, almost a whisper pressed right against my ear, whispered, "Stop reading." I stopped immediately. My hand was shaking. The clock on the wall gun was still frozen at 3:17 a.m. I decided to visit the last remaining neighbor who had lived near the house. The elderly woman wouldn't look me in the eye. She only muttered, "That night I heard a scream around 3 a.m., but no one dared to go outside. Those who did never came back." I asked, "What kind of person was Mai?" She paused for a long moment, then replied slowly, "Kind, quiet. But ever since that clock was brought into her house, she was never the same again. The clock didn't belong to that house. It was the only object inside. No one knew where it came from. I decided to return to the house at night. This time, I brought everything I could. Security cameras, motion sensors, an audio recorder, and a separate digital clock to cross-reference. I needed to know what really happens at 3:17 a.m. I stepped in just before 1 a.m. The air felt just as heavy as before, but now even more intense. Like the entire house was holding its breath. I positioned cameras in every corner of the room, all pointing towards the wall clock. The one that hadn't moved in 30 years. 2:58 a.m. I sat quietly in the living room. The silence was unnatural. 3:07. I started to hear faint clicking noises coming from the floor above. One of the motion sensors triggered briefly, but nothing appeared. Then the flashlight suddenly shut off, just for 2 seconds, and blinked back on. I stayed calm. The audio recorder was still running. 3:15 a.m. Every clock I had, even my phone, began to lag as if something was interfering with time itself. The main camera captured something that, to this day, I still can't watch alone. 3:16:42. The wall clock trembled slightly. The minute hand wobbled. 3:17:00. The hands stopped, but this time they stopped right in front of me. On the camera feed, a blurred silhouette swept across the hallway. No footsteps, no door creaking. The lights in the house cut out instantly. The camera screens turned to static grey. And then, the landline phone in the living room began to ring, which I remember clearly. That phone had already been unplugged, but it still vibrated softly. Once, twice. I didn't answer. I just stood there in the dark, watching its dim little screen blink slowly. And on the screen, there was no caller ID, just a single line of text. 3:17. I left the house just as the first light of dawn crept in. But daylight didn't make me feel safer. When I got home, I immediately checked all my footage, recordings, and data from that night. Most of it was corrupted. The footage showing the clock stopping glitched violently, then froze at exactly 3:17:00. The audio only captured breathing, and one single phrase: "You'll stop too." There was no one else in the room. I didn't say that. I thought that was the end of it. But that night, while I was showering, I looked down at my left wrist. A faint circular mark had appeared, as if I'd just taken off a watch I'd worn for years. But I've never worn a watch on that wrist. In fact, I've never worn a watch at all. I used an EMF detector in my bedroom the following night. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the reading spiked wildly. And since that night, none of the clocks in my house have kept a proper time. Every single one is now delayed by exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds. No more, no less. I don't know what time you're watching this, but if your clock ever stops at exactly 3:17 a.m., ask yourself, did something just enter your home? And if your phone starts to ring, would you dare answer it? The clock had stopped, but the story hasn't. If you've ever had a strange experience with time, share it in the comments below, and don't forget to post it a hat before 3:17 a.m. tonight.